Good morning as folks are joining. It's great to see everybody. Hi, Julie. I see Marissa. I don't see Jane.
She needed the link, so I just emailed it to her.
Oh, okay. Great. Oh, I didn't send it to the. As folks are joining, this is a short week. Strategies is going to be closed on Thursday and Friday. Um, we will have the 9:30 call Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And Wednesday, I know is sharing the mic. I would have learned by now to not start talking when I don't know the answer. Oh, Donna says it's a beautiful day in the 413. Good. Good morning. Yes. Great to see folks. Okay, here comes Jane. And we had the commissioner last Thursday. And so the recordings are in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And we have language playlists for the 9:30 calls. So we have all the 9:30 calls that are in English, in Spanish, and Portuguese. And we also had the 9:30 call in Espanol last Wednesday. And that is also in the 9:30 call Espanol playlist. So we have put them all up, and folks are still joining. Welcome. And so, Julie, I'll turn things over to you. The first question, as you know, is we have folks tell us a little bit about you, how you came to be in your current role, and then we're excited to hear your update.
Thanks, Amy. Good morning. I think I am a long-time listener, first-time
You
caller. I don't think
are a
I've
longtime
actually.
caller, multiple time caller. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't think I've spoken to folks on
Oh,
the
wow.
9:30 call yet. So I'm happy to be here with you all. My roots in the early childhood field are really go back to when I was in high school. I volunteered at an early childhood program at Dimick Community Health. And that sort of sparked my interest. And then my first job out of college was at the Child Care Resource Center in Cambridge, working for Marta Rosa, where I met Amy O'Leary and Amy Kershaw and Margaret Blood as Margaret was starting up Strategies for Children. And so that was where I got my professional start and have had a number of different roles through the years. But most recently, I was at New Profit, which is a philanthropy organization based in Massachusetts. That works nationally, but I was leading an effort there in partnership with EEC to scale up the Early Childhood Support Organization Initiative, which in part leads me to our conversation today. And I left there in January to start independent consulting. So I'm working with a number of different philanthropies and nonprofits to help them improve their impact with young children and youth. And so that's my introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Jane to introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jane Feinberg, and I'm the Executive Director of Power of Place Learning Communities. This is my very first time on the call, so thank you for welcoming me in.
Sorry, I didn't send the link, Jane.
It's okay. You assumed because I've been around a long time. So my own career trajectory, I think I've always been at the foundation a child advocate, but it's taken on a lot of twists and turns. But I'll boil it down to a couple of chapters. Chapter one was as a journalist, specifically a television producer and documentary filmmaker. Sort of half my time at PBS, at WGBH National Productions, and then half my time at WCVB, Channel 5. And toward the end of my time at Channel 5, I led a statewide media campaign on the importance of out of school time to children's development and to healthy communities. And from there, I left the media and I moved really into working in communications, policy advocacy, strategy, working with for out of school time folks, and then in education. I served as press secretary to Boston School Superintendent Tom Payson, which was a great adventure. I was on staff at Frameworks Institute, so my exposure to early childhood, the framing of early childhood messaging, uh, was something that was a part of my portfolio of work. And that was really amazing. I also at Frameworks helped launch a body of work on how Americans think about education, because I wanted a parallel kind of track for the early childhood work. And when the first phase of that was over, I really wanted to get my hands dirty and go into the field and work with school districts to actually roll out that frame. And so I worked with a number of Northern New England school districts that were funded by the Nellie Mae Education Foundation to build support for student-centered learning. Um, Thereafter, Julie and I met when we were at New Profit, and I was working on a different project called Reimagine Learning, which is about better supporting the needs of young people with learning disabilities, learning and attention issues, trauma, etc. And I was a strategic advisor to that project, but also led the kind of regional work in um, moving the theory of change from that project all the way to the ground in school districts. That led to eventually to the creation of the Essex County Learning Community, which is the flagship for Power of Place learning communities. Um, at a certain point, I felt like if we want the kids in schools to prosper, we really need to back up and to go upstream a little bit and make sure that if we want kids to be engaged and happy and thriving, we need to make sure the adults are having a similar experience. So we bring educators together cross-district for reflection, connection, deep learning, all toward building cultures of belonging in schools. So I really love working with educators so much. Our whole team is incredibly passionate about that. And so we created Power of Place, and Essex County Learning Community is our flagship, but we are now launching other learning communities across Massachusetts, and that's how I came to be here today. It's a long
Great. Thank
story because I'm old.
Thanks so much. Marissa?
We always love that story, Jane, because I feel like whenever we ask that question, we get the background on people, which is the best part of the 9:30 call. Hi everyone, I'm Marisa Fear. I'm the Director of Policy at Strategies. So work with AO. I'm normally camera off in the background on these 9:30 calls, but part of the SFC team. I started my career as an early educator and as a SFC intern. So that's a little bit of my history, but I'm gonna turn my time over to Julie, who's gonna kind of kick us off and get us oriented a little bit about what we're talking about today and a little bit of the background behind this idea that we have. And before we do that, I just wanted to share in the chat, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative today, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, and some of you may be hearing about for the first time. So I will put that link in the chat just so that you can take a quick look at their website in case you haven't heard of it and get a little bit of background. But essentially, it's a Department of Early Education and Care grant that funds districts across the state to develop partnerships between school districts and local early education and care programs, both family child care and center-based, to expand access to preschool. So, Julie, I will turn it over to you to get us started.
And just a quick interjection. We started almost 25 years ago around this idea of universal access to high quality preschool. So we have worked on this topic in many iterations at Strategies for Children. And speaking of interns, Casey Peaks is on the call, who is also a Strategies for Children past intern, Zance fellow who worked on we've had many different iterations and many different folks working on it. It's also wonderful to see EEC is here as well. So thanks, Julie.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. It's great to have all of you here with us. And so I wanted to just sort of give a little background. Thank you, Marissa, for that background on CPPI as well. So I wanted to give a little background on how we got to today and what we're going to be sharing with you. So as a part of my work on the Early Childhood Support Organization Initiative, I helped to lead a really powerful learning community in partnership with the EEC among the ECSOs, the Early Childhood Support Organizations, and really saw the positive impact of learning, shared learning in community for these early childhood leaders, and in support of continuous learning and improvement. So we came together over the course of the initiative, and they continue to come together under the leadership of EEC now, and really saw the power of learning in community, both to build practice, build trust and relationships, and improve how we are working with children and their families and educators. And as Jane said, we had met through New Profit, so I knew her background and interest in leading learning communities, and conversations that I was having with Jane about how we could utilize the power of learning communities to support the early childhood field here in Massachusetts intersected with some conversations I was having with Strategies for Children about how to support this local early childhood system building that is seeded by these CPPI grants, but no, that is also happening in a lot of communities around the Commonwealth. And as we talked and developed the idea of a potential collaboration between our three sort of entities, we also met with several CPPI coordinators to sort of pressure test our ideas. We met with the former providers of technical assistance to the CPPI grantees to understand the history of support. And we met with our friends at EEC to be sure that any ideas that we developed would both align with and be complementary to their plans for support of CPPI communities. So that's absolute paramount. So just to highlight, what we're sharing today is really an idea in development. And we're sharing it now because it's important for us that we design something with community and build partnership that reflects your needs and interests. So we wouldn't want to move forward with a plan that was not reflecting those needs and interests. Last week, we presented to CPPI grantees, and we also have sent them a survey to get their feedback on the specifics and their interests. And we're here today to get additional input and reactions. So I'm going to turn it to Marissa to give a little background on how Strategies got here.
Yes. So, as Amy mentioned, I think Strategies has had a long history kind of advocating for local preschool partnership and expansion. And for CPPI specifically, I think that we've seen that, the grant itself has done some really incredible things for communities, and it's often a launch pad to other cross-sector early childhood planning efforts, puts in place some really essential infrastructure and partnerships in the community. So that brings me a little bit to the early childhood agenda, and I saw that Kim Davenport was on the call as well today, who facilitated work group number 6, which was one of the priorities of the early childhood agenda, and was completely focused on how do we support and expand local early childhood infrastructure and partnerships across the Commonwealth. Through sort of the 2 years that we were meeting and working and sort of developing potential recommendations and kind of identifying what are some of the best practices we've seen across the state and where is there maybe opportunity for improvement, CPPI came up a lot. I think that there are some really excellent things, as I mentioned, that grant is doing in communities and that we saw as sort of some of those best practices. Um, as we were developing these recommendations in the work groups, and I should say also that the early childhood agenda, it was, over 1,000 individuals helped us to develop what those priorities were, which eventually led us to Kim's work as part of the local infrastructure work group. And um, as we developed our recommendations, a couple things really stood out as some next steps. And one of those was that there was kind of an ongoing need for peer learning. We talked about the idea of a learning community, of how could we kind of pull together a couple of these communities that have some of these best practices or bright spots across the state and learn more about what is needed to do this work and to move it forward, where they might be able to offer each other technical assistance, where we might be able to offer them technical assistance, and where the development of shared tools or resources would help them to really propel the work forward. So that brings us sort of strategies to this conversation. I think that we're really interested in this work, and we know that as well as sort of statewide solutions to the early childhood system, we also need local solutions. And We're really interested to sort of learn more about what those should be and what the possibilities are, and this idea of a learning community where we can hear directly from some of the CPPI grantees and other interested communities that are sort of doing this early childhood planning efforts was a really exciting prospect. So as Julie mentioned, it's an idea right now, and we're really excited to hear from you all about any thoughts that you might have around our idea and any next steps. So we will get into some of the details now.
Thanks, Marissa. So, what is the idea? The idea is to pilot a learning community over 2 years with CPPI grantees and potentially other interested communities that are working to build local early childhood systems that are inclusive, accessible, and high quality. So, really, this idea that Marissa touched on of building a shared understanding of what it takes to support and implement such a system here in Massachusetts at the local level. So I'm going to ask Jane to tag in a little bit and share what it looks like and feels like to learn in community and how Power of Place facilitates those spaces.
That's great. Thank you so much, Julie. I think probably everybody here has been part of some kind of learning community. And actually, there was an early childhood learning community on how to frame early childhood in Massachusetts that I led when I was at Frameworks. So that was a learning community. I've learned a lot since that time. It was a long time ago about what it means to bring people together. Some of you may know the book, The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. It's one of my favorite books. And how do you bring people into a space where it's a third space? It's not home, it's not school, it's not work, it's something separate. And some really interesting things can happen when you build a space that's psychologically safe, where some of the kinds of topics that are hard to bring up at the workplace can come to the fore, where people really, one of the most common things we hear from folks is, I no longer feel alone. So there's a lot of isolation in this work, and I think especially if we think about people who are on their own, maybe not with other adults during the day, it's hard to keep yourself energized. And so adults come together for deep learning. One of the most important things to us about a learning community is that it's constructivist in orientation, which is aligned with what everything Marissa and Julie have been saying today, which is we don't just give something to you. We ask you what you need, what you want to learn. And then we build an agenda around that. There's so many different things one can learn about. We as the learning community conveners are agnostic about the content because that you're the experts. So we have you lead on what it is you want to learn, and then we believe that we know how to facilitate and how to design experiences that really bring people together and that are sustainable, so that uh, we use the term a lot, the wisdom in the room, that there is so much wisdom. There are experts out there, of course, who we need to bring in to learn from. But there's so much learning that goes on cross community. And we've just found that to be a surprisingly rich experience for folks. What else do you want me to talk about, Julie?
I think that's good, and we'll open the floor for questions later.
Great.
So,
Yeah.
and just to before moving on to the topics, just to say we're getting feedback on logistics, what would make most sense in terms of cadence, what would align with EEC supports, those sorts of things. So, all of those things we're gathering feedback and input from the community on to be sure that it would meet folks' needs. Okay, and I'll turn it to Marissa.
So, as Jane mentioned, I mean, this is really meant to be designed by the learning community itself, and to kind of kickstart that conversation during the info sessions last week, we have generated a list of potential topics here. And, these are wide-ranging topics that we've heard from a number of communities, are things that they either really excel at or that they're struggling with and would love some additional support or thinking through. So I guess I would just put to you all on the 9:30 call. I think whether you want to add it in the chat, and then I think in maybe two slides, we're going to pause and have some time for live discussion. But as you're kind of reading through this list, as you're hearing this idea, when you think about your own community or any of the work that you may have done to support local communities, is there something else that should be on this list that we maybe haven't thought about yet? Do you have any ideas or any thoughts about this idea broadly and how we can sort of move the work forward at the local level and what's needed to do that and how this learning community and this opportunity might do that work. So I can read a few just to give you all a sense, but we have everything on here from, supporting branding and marketing. That was also something I think, Kim, that came up in our local infrastructure work group, this idea of as families move from community to community, how do they know what early childhood resources there are and where to find it? And does it all look the same as they move from community to community, or is it unique to the individual city or town? Transportation is one that we hear a lot about, especially out in Western Mass and rural communities. So that's on the list as well. We talked a lot about social emotional learning was one that is not listed on here, but we talked about at the information session. The grant itself has three kind of main priorities. There's access, quality, and then inclusion. So those are three topics that we know the CPPI grant and the team at EEC do a lot of work around and are supporting communities with, as well as most of the things on this list as well. So don't forget meals. Yes, Brendan, that's a really good one too. Nature focused learning is also really interesting. This is super helpful. So yeah, keep adding that to the chat, but this is sort of just a beginning of some of the potential topics that we would hope to hear from the learning community about what was most important to them.
Thanks, Marissa. And then our idea is also that we wouldn't just want to benefit those folks in the room who are participating in a learning community, but really use it as a platform and springboard to engage legislators around supporting these local system building initiatives, build capacity within the state to design strategic public financing, both at a statewide and a local level. Build a resource library that would be accessible to communities across the Commonwealth that really share tools and learning from those who have implemented universal pre-K systems or system building efforts. And also, finally, to tell the stories that can inform other communities. So being sure that we would raise up those stories from communities who have tried different strategies towards building local early childhood systems.
All right, so some of the desired outcomes. I think that I saw Melora just had a great question in chat too about sort of how we're thinking about this. CPPI grant is really focused on preschool. So how is that sort of situated within a broader early childhood system? And whether it's the CFCs, the Coordinated Family and Community Engagement grantees, or early intervention, home visiting, there's a number of other early childhood programs and services that we see at the local level. And that sort of gets back to what I was talking about earlier with where we see CPPI really as this launch pad that as communities apply for that grant, they go through a planning process, they create a leadership team, develop a strategic plan and a needs assessment. And then what we've seen is that a lot of communities are able to use some of those tools to focus on some of these other early childhood programs and services. So I don't know if I have a direct answer to your question right now on what the exact focus of the learning community would be, but I would just say that even if it is focused specifically on preschool itself and sort of CPPI or how to develop an early learning system, what we've seen is that some of those pieces of infrastructure or partnerships allow communities to do some of that additional work, like early intervention and like visiting. So I think first and foremost, one of the outcomes that we're hoping for here is so that the communities themselves can develop and build ongoing relationships. We know that there's whether it's Facebook groups and sort of a couple of the grantees have been convening meetings among the grantees themselves, and EEC obviously hosts twice monthly check-ins with the grantees. So just to give them an additional space to continue to develop those relationships and to support each other and work on their goals. We are really interested in overall just coordination between school districts and local early education and care programs. I saw a couple comments in the chat about that too, of just how should this look? How can this look in local communities? We've seen a number of offices of early childhood that have been created over the past few years, where it really sort of a governance structure that sits within City Hall or the mayor's office and involves collaboration with districts and then early education and care programs. But that's something we're very interested in through this grant. And then the bright spots. I think that while there is so much that we want to be able to support communities with, there's also so much that people are doing really excellent work. And that was something that came up at the information session last week that, I think someone said, rather than we reinvent the wheel, can we just learn from what other communities have done and utilize that in our own communities? And then I think understand the different elements of a universal preschool. And Massachusetts is fully committed to this mixed delivery system. So we want to make sure that whatever is universally available to families is delivered through both family child care, center-based early education and care programs, and the public schools. So what needs to be in place to be able to make that a reality? And then finally, helping communities to sort of build relationships with their elected officials, helping them to understand the importance of these local investments and just some of the great work that's going on in communities right now. I think that CPPI is largely kind of flown under the radar, and we want to make sure that it's something that people have a good understanding of moving forward. So with that, I think we'd love just to have a discussion for the next minute. I saw there's a couple comments in chat, Amy. Is there any like specific questions that we can maybe answer before we end?
So I think is there a grant that's supporting this? The kind of like, how's that happening? And I think the other thing just to add for context is like, we know like there have been many different funding possibilities, but we also know communities have come together under different circumstances and contexts. So I think it's not one way that we're thinking about it. It's like, how are ways communities coming together to support children and families? But yeah, that's the one question now is about the funding.
Just scrolling through to see if I could see where it was specifically. But in terms of us, so I think as Julie mentioned earlier, this is just an idea right now. There is no funding attached to it. It's something that we wanted to both hear from the CPPI grantees on if they even wanted to do this and if they were going to have time to do this before moving forward, and to hear from you all on the 9:30 call on, how we could improve upon this idea or should adapt it before moving forward. So right now, in terms of us, no grant funding associated. It is just an idea. And then, as I mentioned, CPPI itself is a grant that's funded by the Department of Early Education and Care. So if you're talking about that, that is something that we can add to the chat so you can learn a little bit more about what that grant does for local communities.
And Laura also wondered, how much do you imagine that this is focused primarily on creating strong systems of early education and care at local community, or do you imagine that this will venture into family support outside of childcare, like CFCEs, EI?
So I touched on that one earlier. I think,
Right,
yeah, I think that's a good question, and that's kind of what we're hoping to hear from you all is, what would be most helpful. And I know that some of the topics that we brought up with the information session and the current CPPI grantees kind of touched on that too, of what would they want to focus on if they were to come
right.
together as a community.
And Kathleen just shared, I'd like to see structure, but also freedom for us to bring problems of practice to learn from another. I think that's the other thing. Like as you create these communities, like they want to be, you want to be useful to the communities. And what we have learned too is a lot of times people don't just want to meet and, they want to really dig in and problem solve. So Marissa, what are the next steps?
So next steps are, and I just saw someone put this in the chat, there is such wisdom in the chat. So we're going to save the chat so that we
Yeah, we'll
have
save the chat.
all of your responses. We're keeping the survey open for our CPPI grantees through the end of the month. So hoping to get a few more responses from them. If you are a CPPI grantee that's on the call and haven't completed the survey yet, please do. We'd really love to hear from you about, what gauge your interest in the learning community, as well as what would you want to focus on if we were to move forward with this. And then I think the team is going to kind of take all of that information in and assess and see what the best next steps are. Like, should we move forward with this and in what way? And who else needs to be involved. I know that we've had a lot of conversations with our amazing team at EEC and other partners that have delivered technical assistance throughout the years as well too has been really helpful to better understand what they've been able to offer communities as well. So that'll probably be December, January, I'd say, somewhere in there.
Great.
I don't know, Julie or Jane, anything else you would add?
I just want to add my thank you to all of you for sharing your wisdom with us and feedback. And, if you have any additional feedback, please feel free to reach out. I think you probably have Marissa's email, but I'll put my email in the chat as well.
And I will do the same. And I just want to thank I really want to thank Strategies and also Julie for being such amazing partners in thinking this through and testing it, and just delighted to be back in the early ed space. I feel like I've been corresponding a little bit with some people here that I haven't seen in a long time. So thank you so much, and thanks to all of you very much.
Excellent. So we'll make sure everybody gets the chat. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining. We had over 80 people this morning. Tomorrow, we have our second in the series about from the Little Feet. Little Feet. Oh my gosh. Gen X. No, no small
No
feet.
small feet.
Little Feet is a band. No Small Feet is or a collaboration around young children. So we'll hear from Jennifer and Rachel tomorrow. Wow, maybe it is time for a break here on the 9:30 call. Or maybe Little Feet is coming this week. You never know. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.